have with us once again Dr. Vijay Sazawal from the United States. He is a security affairs expert. He also has been writing about global affairs, and especially in the recent past, he's been talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine. We are going to pick his brains at our platform called Reasons Virtual Episode this time.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Sazawal, you've been watching this 4-month war almost now. Can you briefly tell us what is the status of the war?
It's a war in European theater. It's a war between one European country against the another European country, and of course the Russians call it an operation, and I think they have the same probably legalese that if they go to declare war, they probably have to get through their assemblies and parliament and so on and so forth. So they are calling it an operation. And European side, America has entered in as what I will call as a proxy war. Again, U.S. has a constraint on from their Congress in terms of declaring a war, but in effect, it is a proxy war in which United States is participating as a partner, co-partner with the Europeans. The war has now dragged on for 3 months, and the first initial reaction on the West was that it'll probably finish in 1 week, and that didn't happen because obviously we can go into that later. Some of the Russian expectations didn't mature. On the other hand, in the proxy war, it was believed that within 2 months to 3 months max, Russia will crumble because of the sanctions, and that has not happened either.
Let me
So,
interrupt you here. Let me interrupt you here. You have put this whole war in a very different perspective from what we read in the Western press or even in the Indian press. Do you think that the way this war has been covered by global media, it's given us a neutral picture of the war, or do you feel that there is a certain perspective which is biased perhaps and quite prejudiced in favor of the West, in favor of the NATO countries, and then there is another side of the picture which is being projected by the Russian media or Russia's allies? Do you think that media has completely failed on capturing the comprehensive picture in Ukraine at the moment?
among the many challenges that we have is, especially in the United States, where I am, they have shut down all the Russian media outlets. We used to have access to Russian TV. We used to have access to Russian radio stations. We used to have access to Russian diplomats and their points of view. We used to have access to Russian citizens in Russia, giving. I mean, when I say citizens, I mean experts in the security matters, giving us their perspective. And some of them used to work for Americans, like at the Carnegie Moscow Center and so on and so forth. But all those have been shut down. So we really have absolutely no knowledge in the United States, other than obviously people who are catching on social media. Social media is vast, but you have to understand that doesn't really reflect the what I call the Idaho, the farmer, the bread and butter of American citizenry, which really isn't all that tied up to the social media as youngsters and some of the professionals at the upper end are. So the middle America really knows very little about what's going on there, other than what's being fed from the Western sources, because we have no access to the information on the other side. As much as the Russians probably are doing their own propaganda on their side, but the only thing we hear is how Russian are not giving access to the British or BBC or other journalists or here journalists, which is ironic given the fact they have actually kicked out all the journalists from Russia over here. So we are getting absolutely one-sided views on both sides. To a large extent,
So
I'm not.
would you let me interrupt again. So would you say that if somebody reads both the Russian press and the American or the Western press, then perhaps one could get a proper, complete picture about the war.
That's true. That's true. And I will also say one thing. I think in India, I personally feel, since I have access to Indian channels, I feel there's a little better, distinctly little better perspective, because they do sometimes capture the news on the other side also, even though they have been mostly also kind of echoing the Western version of the narrative. But they still have a little bit of the Russian side. They have invited Russian commentators on some channels and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit better there than it is really here. But there's no question the domineering aspect of the narrative comes from the Western sources. The biggest challenge in that narrative is, which people don't realize, is that Ukraine has passed certain laws which make a lot of their information classified, so that even if a journalist is actually in Ukraine, he cannot, under the Ukrainian law, which he's obviously subjected to when he's on the Ukrainian ground, he cannot report that news because he is covered by the fact that it's a classified news. Give you an example. Uh, they probably know how many Ukrainians have been killed, but they cannot report it because that's a classified number. So the only number that is illegal is the one that is issued by Ukrainian government. So you see how they cover this aspect of legality to essentially censor the news and to make it more palatable for Western journalists. Say, oh, the Ukrainian authorities said, 7 of our guys died and 1,000 of the Russians died. So even though that balance seems to be completely out of the whack. For example, they are saying, or maybe a few thousand Ukrainian dies and tens of thousands of Russians have died. One source said one-third of the Russian army has been decimated. I mean, there are all kinds of reports that basically Ukraine feeds. So you have essentially a problem where the narrative is not only set actually because of the biases within the networks and the people covering it, but also because they are constrained by Ukrainians to cover the news that the way they want to present it, and that even in fact makes it even a lot worse.
In 3 months, what has Russia achieved in this military operation, quote unquote, and what has Ukraine achieved while fighting the Russians?
Well, there is a little bit of you have to go a little bit of history to understand where we are. Obviously, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, going all the way back to 1989, when Soviet Union started destructing and the Berlin Wall came on and all that. But there was a period when the Soviet empire disintegrated. The people on the eastern side of Ukraine essentially sought, under the Ukrainian government, an independence, autonomy, and most Ukrainians actually were willing to agree to it, but the certain section did not, and this was the virulent ultra nationalist, white supremacist, predominantly Catholic, living in Western Ukraine. They did not agree to this autonomy, which was supposed to be under the Ukrainian government to come through. And even though the French and the Germans worked very hard, and then Americans, President Obama joined in, and they had these Minsk one and Minsk two agreements, which more or less would have given them that cover. It didn't happen. Instead, what happened was, this was 2014, and that's a very critical year, quite honestly, in this whole narrative. 2014 was also the one where when Mariupol, which was predominantly a Russian city at that time within Ukraine. Well, these ultra nationalists, which really have a military name called Azov Regiment, they decided that they're going to teach them a lesson. So they went and essentially, sort of suppressed any kind of autonomy ideas, and then they entered the Donbass region in a big way. So from 2014 and 15 onwards to last time, these ultra nationalists, who had since, of course, also been absorbed as part of the National Guard of Ukraine, so they have been legitimate. So they were given essentially a legitimacy by the state of Ukraine, because Ukraine thought, quite frankly, if they're fighting those guys on the eastern front of their country, it was okay. The problem is that those were all Russian speaking people and essentially a Russian descendants living in that area. So for 8 years, they have been begging the world to come to their aid. That we had the Minsk one, Minsk two agreements. Nobody is enforcing them. Ukraine doesn't want to enforce them, and Russian government was always under pressure by its own people, saying, "What are you doing about our fellow Russians in Ukraine? They are getting massacred by these people." Well, that was not recognized. So essentially, origins of this operation began. But then Russians got a little more ambitious, and I think there was a major security failure, intelligence failure on part of Russians. They really believed, like the 2014 revolution in coup in Kiev, when ultranationals basically uh, sort of stumbled the government, the duly elected, democratically elected government in Kiev in 2014. The Russians really thought this time, because of us, because of the intelligence, whatever they had, which was obviously faulty, that the Russian-speaking people in Kiev will wake up and get up and support us, just like the ultranationals did in 2014. When they basically got that pulled that government down. Well, that didn't happen. So all these troops staying outside the country essentially never made it in because that coup did not succeed, and as a result, they had to make their objectives more realistic, and that realism was that we got to go back to what we all started with, which is that we got to get these people a decent life in the regions of Donbass, and of course, in that period, things had changed. One of them was that they had not only declared autonomy, now they had gone one step further and declared independence. And Russia said, well, "Okay, we'll honor, we'll respect, and we'll help you secure that independence." So, so the Russian goals have, I think, come down to a more reasonable sort of set of conditions, and from the ones
So
that they
how
started.
how have you made that assessment that Russia is going to stop at so and so point, or Russia is only aiming at capturing certain areas and going to leave? How have we made that assessment?
Well, that assessment mostly comes from their own statements. They're basically ensuring. I mean, they have essentially said what we're going to do is we're going to essentially establish this parameter which will allow the Crimea essentially a land access. I would say if there's anything hidden in their agenda, it is possibly that they will deny the sea access to Ukraine forever, which cannot happen if they don't take over Odessa. Now, Odessa is a problem because Odessa is actually, it used to be once the capital of a state called New Russia, and it's really very Russian in its outlook, and it has got really tremendous amount of Russian art, heritage, and things like that. So taking it will involve a lot of pain and a lot of sort of
But
disintegration
do
of.
you think, because given the areas that the Russians have captured so far,
Mhm.
it looks like they are heading towards Odessa, and there is a pushback from Zelensky's forces, and as well as perhaps NATO,
Well,
who you said are, there are, it's a proxy war.
it's
So
a it's a
are you
proxy
seeing?
war. Most of the military armament that has been received by Ukraine so far, it's really not that easy as they're making it sound on the in the news, because most of the they have to move that stuff from west to east, and most of the lines of communication, whether they are railroad, bridges, that sort of thing, they're mostly been demolished. You can't really move a lot of heavy equipment from that side over to the eastern front. So they are handicapped by the fact that whatever guns, long range guns, for example, they had in the Donbass region, the guns are still okay, but they are run out of ammunition, which is Russian, because they were Russian long range guns. So now they are asking Americans to provide them with the long range guns, and Americans will probably get it to them in 2 3 weeks, and then have training and all that. But
So
that's part of the
in a way, the dice is loaded against Zelensky's forces. It's loaded against NATO.
Well, that is very obvious from the reassessments that are now taking place. I want to spend a couple of minutes on this. I would say last 2 weeks, There is now a realization, and in fact, the last major town standing in Donbass is where there is fighting taking place today. I couldn't name it because it's a very long, lengthy, complicated name, but it's the last major town of any significance, and the battle is raging there. And the latest reports are that most likely Ukrainians are going to lose it. And if they lose it, then and essentially they have cleared, they have cleared the landmass that they wanted, the Russians wanted over the period. There is a reassessment that Ukraine is going to lose that area one way or the other. And the question now becomes, how do we bring a sense of stability and make Russians not go any further and essentially end ceasefire and some agreement? So there has been discussion in Western countries on that regard. There is an Italian proposal in that regard. Yesterday, for the first time in a long time, the French and the German chancellors, German and the president of France, spoke for 80 minutes with Putin. They wouldn't give him 2 seconds, quite honestly, earlier. So I see a realization creeping in the Western side that this war is really not going anywhere. With the tampered down ambitions of Russia, that they are actually basically creating a basis for a long-term stay in the regions that they possess. So the last person, in a sense, who is still not convinced is obviously Ukraine. And Ukraine is really a very, very strange country right now because its president a millionaire, who just bought a house about a year back in Miami for over $100 million. Is a really rich guy. Wasn't expected to do much, but he actually has, sort of been chosen by the West as one of its star athletes. So he has got it in his head, and he basically is not yet allowing himself or his staff to think in terms of actually understanding what is going on the ground and becoming a reasonable.
Has have all these sanctions which the West imposed on Russia affected Russia in any way, or was it only to basically almost penalize the rest of the world for this war?
I think it has affected Russia in some ways, but it has not affected Russia perhaps in the manner that the West had indicated. And part of the reason is that, and same thing goes with Chinese. I mean, they have been all buffering their whether it's their technologies, or whether it's their financial sector, whether it's their economic sector, export. I mean, they have been sort of strengthening them. I mean, there are lessons out of North Korea, lessons out of Iran, which I understand is actually doing a lot of advising to the Russian government, and so in a sense, all these countries have survived the sanctions, very punitive sanctions. So sanctions really, at the end of the day, I don't think really work in that manner. But in this case, actually, they have had a vastly, dramatically negative impact. And it's not only the poorer countries that you speak about. The truth of the matter is, in the United States, we have never seen gas at $5 about a gallon. We are in a tremendous inflationary stage. Shelves are not filled with goods because we're told the supply chain is disrupted. We have a stock market that is really crashing. It's really gone. Sort of floor has fallen through it. So we are having a tremendous impact on the retirees, their retirement funds, their way of living, the cost of rent. So it has impacted very, very negatively all the way around. So that, I think that I will be honest, I don't think as much as poor countries are really taking the brunt of that pain. It's not that it's as much affecting these powerful nations as it is in their own backyards, understanding that it has had very serious impact in their own country. It's very interesting because grain is not being allowed out of Ukraine, so they're asking the Russians to allow it, and Russians are saying, well, you are sanctioning me, and so I have to have a certain consequence of that, and I'm ready to talk. If you guys talk about sanctions, I'll talk about how we can get that grain out of Ukraine. So it's that aspect of the business is there too.
So let me ask you another question. Because as you are predicting, and as we are seeing the situation on the ground in Ukraine, it looks like Russia will have complete control over Black Sea, and therefore will have the leverage and the power to control the supplies from both Ukraine and Russia. So where does that bring all of us who are dependent on Russia's or Ukraine supplies, and where does it take the West from here on? Because of, if Russia really gets complete control of the Black Sea, where will be the West in this whole scenario?
You have to understand the real constraint is really finances, why Western countries are thinking differently. Ukraine needs about $7 billion a month to survive. These $7 billion basically are what keeps the salaries of government employees, their pensions, basic water, electricity, that basic kind of infrastructure going. $7 billion. Their country is in a situation right now because of both the destruction of their machinery, of their mechanical aspects of the business, as well as the exports curtailment. They can raise about 2 billion a month, so they need 5 billion a month to survive. At the beginning, all these countries were very enthusiastic. Yes, we will support them, but reality is, in 3 months in the war, people are realizing, we cannot keep this spigot running. $5 billion a month is not a joke, especially when you look at the Ukrainian. I mean, when you look at the European really haven't given much money as much as they talk a lot, because at the end of the day, war is a symptom of failed leadership and diplomacy. So both
True.
diplomacy and leadership failed in this case. United States really does bear a lot of burden on that leadership and diplomacy, and unfortunately, it's not the best of the times in the United States, and in terms of the
I
administration.
want to bring your attention to one major issue. A lot of people have differing opinion on the impact of this war on China. A lot of people, some people say that it has affected China badly, and some people say that it has actually strengthened Russia-China partnership. Would you agree with either of the opinions? Where does China stand in this all?
First of all, for anybody to think China is intimidated by these moves of West or anything like that, they are living in a fool's paradise. China is a civilizational state, just like India. We don't necessarily get intimidated because we have outside sources are trying to dictate what happens. We have our own capacities. We have a legacy of thousands years of survival as a civilization. We don't get intimidated. Chinese are not intimidated at all. What Chinese are doing right now are they are learning the process. What is happening, what are these countries doing, and how can I neutralize that thing if really tomorrow the charge is against me. Because at the end of the day, there was always an argument that really the world order, capturing the world order, new world order, is really the main goal, and that is the theme in which the United States and China will eventually lock their horns. And this was a diversion that really wasn't needed. And I think Dr. Kissinger put it, and who is I would consider one of the masters of realpolitik. He said what West is doing is they are really getting Russians and Chinese together. These wouldn't, because Russia is a European country. See, that's what he says. This is a new order will take place if we don't do anything about it, because these boundaries of historical dimension, which are kind of unwritten boundaries, where a European country will actually align with an Asiatic country to create a combine that will essentially be a challenge to the rest of the European countries and the Western world. I think that's a major statement that he made. Now, as I said, most of the American and Western press played him down because he was obviously telling things that they are not projecting. How are we going to prevent the Chinese Russian alliance if we keep doing these kind of things that we are doing right now in Ukraine? And that is a challenge, in my point of view, which is not easily answerable.
Now, my last question. with the kind of rhetoric that we are seeing on the Ukrainian war, we are seeing a polarized world. We are seeing a whole bunch of people who are supporting Zelensky, who are supporting Ukraine, and there is a section of the world, in fact, several countries, dozens and dozens of countries, who did not vote against Russia at the United Nations, even as several resolutions were brought in to condemn Russia's attack on Ukraine. So it seems that at least half of the world was not on the NATO side. Can you put this in perspective? One, that how is this rhetoric going to shape the worldview of billions of people, you know, 7 billion, 7.5 billion people? And second, how is this polarization eventually going to get neutralized? Or will it even get neutralized at some stage?
I think there will be. One of the reasons is, fortunately, is that most of the information war on social media, quite frankly, is sort of like flavor of the month. It really moves along as it is dictated by the deep state, and the United States actually controls most of that information dissemination. And United States, for all its faults, has one wonderful attribute, which is when it leaves an idea behind, it really leaves an idea behind. It's not, again, that's a tendency of civilizational countries, which where the schisms run very deep, and people don't forget and forgive the past commissions and omissions. United States is a way of doing those things, because it basically moves from and that in a sense controls the considerable amount of Western opinion. So I would think that yes, once this thing is over, I wouldn't be surprised if all these McDonald's and all these country companies will be back there in Russia. That's a big market, and they cannot afford not to be there. They just don't want to be on the wrong side at this time in public relations war. That's the war that is being fought, sort of tooth and nail right now. But in my view, this too shall pass, and onwards to something next. I mean, that's part of the
Uh,
military-industrial combined industrial game.
Well, this has been once again a fabulous, enlightening, fascinating conversation. Thank you for being with us and enlightening us about Ukraine today. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I wish you all well.